is it even worth it for me to try and go fishing on this trip? Now, if you're anything like me, the answer to that question is almost always going to be yes. And hopefully give you some tips to think about when you're traveling and how to make fishing while traveling work. Just to give you a little bit of context to the trip that I'm about to talk about. And it was a recent work trip where I was not able to pack everything that I normally bring when I go fishing. In this particular trip, because of where I was going and what I was going to be doing, I couldn't bring along my normal fly rod. I couldn't bring along my hip waders. And I was also really limited in terms of the other gear that I could bring along due to the size of the bag that I was carrying. And as I was getting ready for this trip, I had sort of this moment where I was like, well, do I even go fishing? Well, if you're anything like me, the answer to that question inevitably is yes, it is. So from that sort of decision, I went and started to look at, well, what other gear could I bring, or how could I make fishing happen on this trip? And from that decision, that led to some other things that I ended up bringing, which I'm going to share, as well as several lessons that I learned about while traveling and fishing. So the first lesson that I'm going to share with you is to be adaptable. On this work trip in particular, I really had to change my approach to fishing. Normally I'm bringing along a 9'5" weight. I've got my hip waders. I've got my sling pack that I bring along, and I'm very good around the setup and with the gear that I normally use. But on this trip, due to the limitations of the size of the suitcase that I was bringing, I couldn't bring along my normal gear. And so I had to look at what I had in terms of rods and in terms of lines and things like that, and make a decision so that, hey, how do I take this small suitcase that I'm bringing along, but then also fit in some fishing gear? And so for me, what I ended up doing was taking a Tenkara rod with me. And a Tenkara rod, if you haven't used it, it folds up into something like about this size, very small, very convenient to put in a backpack or in a suitcase. And so by adapting to the circumstances that you may find yourself in, you are enabling yourself to still go fishing on that trip. In addition to adapting our approach when we're traveling and still trying to fish, one of the next things that I want to share with you is the importance of just simplifying down the gear that you're bringing. Normally when I go fishing, I've got an entire bag full of stuff, but on this trip, I was really limited as to what I could bring with me. And so as I'm getting ready and packing, I was looking at the flies, right, as a good starting point. Well, what flies do I take? Well, I can't take, my normal fly box. I've got to really simplify it down. And so ultimately what I did was I just took a very small fly bin and made sure that I covered the bases in terms of having some dry flies, in terms of having nymphs, as well as some streamers and some terrestrials. And I had to be okay with knowing that I was going to have less flies with me. In addition to a simpler fly selection, I was also thinking about tippet and what size tippet to use. And for this trip in particular, I ended up just bringing along one spool of 5X. Now, normally when I fish, I've got a couple tippet spools with me, right? Just to sort of cover any situations that I run into. But for this trip in particular, given the size limitations of the suitcase, I was really trying to get down to the bare minimum of the gear that I had. So the lesson here really is to simplify your gear down as much as possible, right? For me, I couldn't bring along the normal flies and the normal tippet spools, but what I found is that by simplifying my gear, it ultimately made my time on the water a little bit easier because I had less stuff to have to sort through and think about. Sometimes while trying to combine traveling and fishing, we are limited as to where we can go fishing. And so if you're like me and you're trying to sort of jam in some fishing while also on a trip, consider that time as an opportunity to try some new water or even water that you would normally skip. So, on the trip that I am sharing with you today, the schedule really didn't allow me to go to my normal places that I like to fish. In particular, there's a river um, nearby that I really like to fish, and I've fished several times. But on this trip in particular, the timing didn't allow, and the season didn't really allow for me to go there. And so, instead of going to my normal place, I ended up going to a small pond in a park, and it ended up being a terrific experience. The pond was chock full of bluegill, and if you've ever fished bluegill with a tenkara rod, you'll know that it's a fantastic time. And so when you are trying to fish while also maybe being on a work trip or a family trip, think about it in this way. And that is that it's an opportunity for you to try out some water, some new water that you may have skipped or not even considered in the past. So the final thing that I'll share with you is less of a tip and more of a lesson. And that is to find contentment in the fishing that you are able to do. Look, if you're anything like me, you could spend all of your days fishing. And oftentimes, though, when we are traveling, we don't have the opportunity to fish all day. We have little windows where we can get out on the water. And the lesson here is to find contentment in the time that you do get to spend fishing. On this trip that I've talked about, I was able to get out for an afternoon or two, and it wasn't a very long time, right? It was just an hour or maybe two. But for me, it was good to just get out on the water, right? To sort of get away from the grind and fish for a little bit. And there was a time in my life where if I couldn't go fishing for 4 or 5 or 6 hours at a clip, I wouldn't go. But now I'm at a point where even if it's just an hour or two, I try to find contentment in that time. And I would encourage you to take a similar approach. If you're on a trip and you get an afternoon on the water, be grateful for it. If you're on a trip and you end up finding a little pond like I was, and it's just bluegill that are in there, be content with that. Because the opportunity and the time to go fishing is something that we should appreciate, especially in times when it's maybe less ideal than what we'd like. Sometimes we have to adapt to what we want with fishing. No. Sometimes our approach to fishing has to change. In fact, that's probably a true statement. So besides adapting to where we're going, you know, sometimes when we're trying to combine a work trip or a family trip and with fishing, the fishing isn't as good as we want it to be. So I hope that in today's video you've picked up a couple tips on how to make the fishing a little bit better. So remember, be adaptable. Think about simplifying your gear and your flies, as well as choosing places that are more convenient or that you might have skipped in normal circumstances. And then finally, strive to find contentment in the fishing that you do get to do. And I appreciate you staying all the way to the end of the video. Let me know down in the comments if you have any tips when trying to combine fishing with other types of travel and what your experiences are like.